Theresa May is quite possibly the most inept, duplicitous and undemocratic Prime Minister Britain has ever had. Not only has she broken her election promises, failed on important issues such as immigration and policing, but she has potentially sabotaged Brexit and acted in an undemocratic fashion. So in no particular order, let's list the 5 biggest reasons why Theresa May is totally useless and has been a destructive force for the UK. Number 1. Immigration. Let's start with the big one, her record on immigration. Despite her repeated promises to get immigration figures below 100,000 per year, in 2016, when she was Home Secretary, she let in 650,000 migrants legally, and a further 200,000 were estimated to have come into Britain illegally. This brings the total number of migrants entering the UK in 2016 to a massive 850,000. I read this from The Sun, and I quote, "Theresa May's pledge to control immigration after Brexit was called into fresh doubt as it emerged a record 650,000 new arrivals poured into Britain in just the last year. In a devastating indictment on the PM and her ministers, the majority who came here in the 12 months to June, 289,000 were not from the EU, but from the rest of the world." End quote. And let's put that in perspective. That's more migrants in a single year than England took in between 1066, the last time we were successfully militarily invaded, and 1939, the beginning of the Second World War. If all these newcomers formed their own city, that city would be the 4th largest in the whole country after London, Birmingham and Liverpool. Rather than reducing immigration to the tens of thousands, as promised, she holds the record for allowing in the highest number of migrants of any Home Secretary in Britain's history. Number 2. The attack on Syria. When it comes to taking Britain to war, no post-Second World War Prime Minister is more synonymous with lies and warmongering than Tony Blair. And Tony Blair did lie to Parliament about weapons of mass destruction. However, he did at least allow a free and open debate in Parliament so MPs could make a democratic decision over whether the UK should commit to military action in Iraq. This is something Theresa May didn't do. In fact, Theresa May authorised military involvement in Syria without offering any vote and simply claiming that Britain had no alternative and couldn't wait for UN approval. Theresa May's actions prove she has no concern for parliamentary democracy or for international law. I would wager the reason she didn't ask for a vote in Parliament is because she feared she would have lost that vote, in the same way she has lost the public support over the issue of Syria. Again, we have another Prime Minister who claims to have evidence over the actions of a foreign power but isn't showing any of this evidence to either the public or to members of Parliament. Theresa May can be seen as not only a warmonger but also as someone with no respect for parliamentary democracy. To hear more about the lack of evidence and the faked gas attack in Syria, watch my video, Assad Didn't Do It. It's linked in the description below. Number 3. Crime and policing. Britain is in the middle of a knife crime epidemic. People often claim this is just limited to London, but the problem goes much further and affects several large metropolitan areas around the country. We heard earlier this year that the murder rate in London has actually surpassed the murder rate in New York. But it doesn't end there. Another shocking headline revealed that every 90 minutes a crime takes place in Britain that involves a machete. Now surely this situation has been aided by Theresa May's disastrous record on immigration. She has allowed people to simply waltz into Britain from all over the world, and the results are plain to see. But it's not just about allowing people into the UK that, how can we say, have a different culture to the indigenous people. It's also about the way we police those people who have come to the UK. And shockingly, Theresa May, as Home Secretary, actually worked to prevent the police from stopping and searching black males who they suspected of carrying weaponry. I read this from the Telegraph, and I quote, "A few years ago, Theresa May set out to make a hard-hitting speech about how too many law-abiding black men were being stopped and searched by the police. Her officials got to work on it, but soon hit a problem. The only in-depth study showed that if anything, white men were the ones being singled out. There was no evidence to suggest any kind of racial discrimination." End quote. So despite the data actually suggesting that police were already singling out white men to be stopped and searched, and I believe that was being done consciously by police officers who wished to avoid accusations of racism, Theresa May still claimed in a speech that black men were 7 times more likely to be stopped, and of course, she had to prevent this injustice going on any further, and she even threatened officers that if they didn't stop searching black males, she would bring in legislation to force them to stop searching black males. So now, as we witness knife crime figures skyrocketing, you have to ask, what was Theresa May's role in bringing about this bloodbath? Well, she allowed hundreds of thousands of immigrants to flood into Britain, and then she stopped the police from policing them. The results are clear to see. In fact, they are written in blood on British streets. To hear more about this issue, check out my video called "The Truth About London's Knife Crime Epidemic." It's linked in the description below. Number 4. Islam. Theresa May has always had a habit of sucking up to minorities, and she has made a special effort to appease Muslims. Not content with parading around in a headscarf in a vain attempt to please hardline Islamists, Theresa May went as far as to state that Sharia law benefited many people living in the UK. I read this from the Daily Express, and I quote, "Top Tory Mrs May, who wants Britain to stay in the European Union, insisted the inquiry will not look into the legality of Sharia law courts in a move designed to reassure Muslims. There are thought to be around 100 Sharia law courts operating throughout the UK, dispensing Islamic justice outside the remit of our own legal system. Judgments handed down by the informal courts have no legal basis, but there are fears their presence means many Muslim women are not getting access to the justice they deserve." But in a controversial intervention, Mrs May yesterday claimed that many British Muslims benefit a great deal from their existence. End quote. Now, I'm not sure how a legal system that condones the stoning of women, public beatings, honour killings, or forced marriages benefits anyone in the UK, apart from Islamic extremists, that is. But maybe you would like to write to Theresa May and ask her why Britain needs a second parallel legal system for Muslims. A legal system that endorses brutality. But as she helped Islamist rebels such as ISIS in Syria by bombing the Syrian government, she seems to want to please similar extremists here in the UK. And that's just one reason why so many Muslims seek to come to Britain. The other reason is Britain's welfare benefit system, which has been changed to benefit Muslims. You can learn more about that in my video, How the British Welfare System Benefits Muslims. It's linked in the description below. Number 5. Brexit. Now, I don't know why anyone ever trusted Theresa May one bit with Brexit. After all, she did campaign against it. But she did more than just campaign against it. Before the vote, she played the role of the good little globalist and held a private meeting with Goldman Sachs bankers to reassure them that as Home Secretary, she was dead against Britain leaving the European Union. I read this from The Guardian, and I quote, "Theresa May privately warned that companies would leave the UK if the country voted for Brexit during a secret audience with investment bankers a month before the EU referendum." A recording of her remarks to Goldman Sachs, leaked to The Guardian, reveals she had numerous concerns about Britain leaving the EU. It contrasts with her nuanced public speeches, which dismayed Remain campaigners before the vote in June. Speaking at the bank in London on the 26th of May, the then Home Secretary appeared to go further than her public remarks to explain more clearly the economic benefits of staying in the EU. She told staff it was time the UK took a lead in Europe and that she hoped voters would look to the future rather than the past. End quote. So whilst she bowed to the internationalist bankers behind closed doors, Theresa May played her cards slightly more close to her chest in public, and then became Prime Minister, where she has pretended to be the one who would fight for Brexit until her last breath, whilst making every blunder possible to delay Brexit, and in doing so, she has repeatedly allowed the Remainers chance after chance to mount legal objections against the process. I made 2 videos on this, The Great Brexit Betrayal Part 1 and Part 2. They are again linked in the description below. So in summary, it's clear to see Theresa May is no patriot. In fact, she's committed to the internationalist dream of a global world without borders and nations, a world where Muslims have more rights than the indigenous people of Britain, a world where Brexit didn't happen, and a world without democracy where she can order airstrikes on foreign countries without even a thought for parliamentary checks and balances. But the worst thing about Theresa May is she does all of that whilst wearing the mask of conservatism and talking tough on issues in order to con people out of their votes. Make no mistake, Theresa May isn't part of the solution. She is part of the problem. She is a tool of those who wish to destroy Britain. She serves the internationalists and their anti-Western agenda. Thank you for listening. If you enjoyed this podcast, please help spread the message by liking and sharing it on social networks. If you want to hear more from me, please hit the subscribe button, as new videos are posted every week. You can also read my book, The Fall of Western Man. It's available as a free ebook and in both hardback and paperback, and all the links are in the description below. Finally, if you want to join in the discussion with me, feel free to add me on Facebook and follow me on Twitter. Also, you can now follow me on Gab, Minds and BitChute as well. Everyone's welcome.